around, I found there's probably about 13 or 14 books we're synthesizing to put together the notes that you've gotten. We're going to put together a good bibliography as far as where they're coming from so that you'll be able to acquire the same books and mark up your own. Now, one of the reasons why I give you this sheet, notice that there's borders on each side, and on the second page there's a lot of room. I want you to write all over these things. All right? These are yours, so write all over them and put your notes on them. Don't stick them into a plastic sheet yet. They don't do you any good stuck in a plastic sheet until you've already marked them, noted them, and just scribbled the daylights out of it, because that's where it's really going to come in handy. Funny, come here real quick. Are you there in Revelation chapter 16? And we're going to start at the top of the sheet. Grab my other Bible that's on my... Revelation chapter 16, we'll start with verse number 19. Has everybody got both sheets there? All right, let's get both sheets going here. Okay, the second sheet. Here we go. Now, many of these things we've touched on, but we touched on them in reference to getting a picture of what it is that God is doing in the book of Revelation, specifically in the end times, that which is referred to as the eschatology, the last days studies. This is something that is really important to us because we've gone through and starting in chapter 4, digressed and went all the way back into Genesis and began to pull the thread forward, understanding what it is that God is laying out for us. But in the 16th chapter, the vials of wrath are being poured out. And just as the last vial of wrath is poured out, in verse number 19, it says, "And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." So in verse number 17, the 7th angel pours out his vial. That's the last vial of God's wrath being poured out. And as the wrath is being poured out of the last vial, at the end of verse 17 it says, "It is done." God was finished with pouring out his wrath. Now, if you remember, there were seal judgments, there were bowl judgments, and now there are these vial judgments. And this is literally the last of the wrath of God being poured out. Next is going to be literally the King of Kings and Lord of Lords returning on the white horse to smash the grapes of wrath in the valley of Megiddo. But in verse 17, the last vial of wrath is poured out, and the end of the verse says, "It is done." By the time you get to verse 19, which is where our text takes off from, it says, "And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and God suddenly remembers Babylon." Now, there's something to this Babylonian city, or there's something to this imagery of Babylon that we need to take into consideration if we're going to begin to understand exactly what it is that takes place in the last days, especially when we want to recognize what Babylon actually is, because many times people just refer to Babylon as, the false church. We know that Babylon is the seat of false religion. As the prophet Daniel and 2nd Ezra began to unfold the end time events, one of the things we see take place in Babylon is that the symbolism of Babylon is similar to that of Jesus. It's always going to be a winged lion. It's going to be something that comes. The Antichrist comes in the book of Daniel, say, on a horse with a bow and no arrows. Revelation tells us, Daniel says it's by flatteries that he obtains his power and his authority in his kingdom. So here is a false prince of peace that is given power. So to understand fully what it is that takes place and how it is that we're going to relate this even to our lives today, it's important for us to see exactly what Babylon is. So suddenly upon the pouring out of the last vial, the voice from heaven says it's done. So God's wrath being poured out, it's done, it's over. But suddenly Babylon comes to remembrance. So there's something special for Babylon. If you remember, or if you even think back on the study we did through the book of Revelation, you'll remember that on the nations, that God specifically wanted to deal with, especially when we read it out of Isaiah and Ezekiel. He calls them out by names. There's certain nations that he's going to get. He's going to get Libya. He's going to get Ethiopia. He's going to get Turkey. He's going to get portions of Egypt. There's certain cities, there's certain nations that God's just going to get. He's not forgetting what they did to God's people. But he has something special in mind for Babylon, because when he's all through with the wrath, he says, God remembered Babylon. Now listen, he's pouring his wrath out. He's literally bringing plagues, dropping the stars, poison in the waters. Death is taken. Israel is persecuted. The devil and the beast and its system comes in. Let me have a set. And suddenly, God remembers Babylon. So there's something special in store for it. Verse 19, we'll read it again. And the great city was divided into three parts. The cities of the nations fell, and the great Babylon came to remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So God's got something special reserved for Babylon. And every island fled away, the mountains were not found, and there fell upon men a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent, and men blasphemed God because of the plague of hail, for the plague thereof was exceedingly great. And we read that in Ezekiel 38, 100-pound hailstones. Chapter 17, verse 1, and we're following along in our sheet now. There came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked to me, saying, Come hither, and I will show thee the judgment of the great whore that sits on many waters. Now in verse 19, what did God remember? He remembered Babylon. So when we see the end of chapter 16, God remembers Babylon. By the time we get to the 7th chapter, he refers to it as a great whore. So let's begin to understand that these are synonyms, that these words literally are referring to the same party. The angel with the last vial of wrath pours it out, and suddenly God remembers Babylon. Then we jump from chapter 16 to chapter 17, and it says, There came one of the seven angels that had the seven vials, and talked to me, saying to me, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sits on many waters. And as we read the book of Revelation and come to that reference of many waters is a euphemism that refers to literally multitudes of people. So this harlot, or this great whore, sits upon many waters. So the imagery we have here is that just as many people as are listed in this multitude that John sees in heaven, when he says he saw the people as it were a multitude of water, everybody says, ooh, because John is seeing all this multitude, or he sees all this water, this imagery of water in heaven, and everybody, ooh, that's the saints. What's the great whore sitting on? Man, a lot of water. Now this is why God remembers her. This is the deception. The angel came and said, Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great whore that sits on many waters. So we are going to see now the judgment of the great whore. Chapter 16 refers to her as what? Babylon. Now, let's stop there, because we have to again digress. Chapter 10 of the book of Genesis. Thought I'd never say this, but I can't wait for my Bible to come in. I can't deal with these pages falling out anymore. I found that as this Bible gets older, too, the letters get smaller. So I ordered the large print this time. I also noticed how my notes in the margins, they seem to diminish in size. I think it's that shrinking ink. Yeah, he's got these pages falling out. Genesis 10. Now, we talked about this when we were talking about the races and the separation of ethnicities. But in chapter 10, as we read in verse number 6, it says, The sons of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, and Phut, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Sheba, Havilah, Sabta, Raamah, Shabtekna. The sons of Raamah, Sheba, Dedan. And Cush begat Nimrod. and he became a mighty one on the earth. He was mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter was before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Now Shinar is just another word referring to that geographic location called Babylon. So when we, in fact, I think it was during that session when we were literally speaking of the separations of the peoples in the land. I can't wait to get that new Bible. A bunch of it just fell. Shinar is Babylon. Our King James spells Akkad that way, but anybody that studied the Middle East understands the Akkadians. You've got the Tigris and Euphrates River. Sinai Peninsula to get a better view. Tigris and Euphrates River. Turkey's over here. Assyria. Babylon's over here. This region, Ur of the Chaldees, where Abraham was called out. Akkad, Babel, all in this area, synonymous with Babylon. So what we're dealing with is the exact same area geographically and the location. And that becomes important, especially when we start to speak of Babylon and what it actually is. Nimrod, the son of Semiramis, is that one which is often referenced as to the false Christ. Nimrod, in mythology as well as in his story of his being, is said to have been conceived of a sunbeam by his mother Semiramis. So it's a virgin birth. False Jesus. So Nimrod had a fame that went before him that literally mimicked that of Jesus. So Nimrod builds a city in Shinar, builds a kingdom. It's called Babylon. As he built these cities, as you turn your Bibles to the book of Genesis, the 11th chapter, Nimrod also is responsible for that tower that is built in Babel. Now, a lot of people don't understand that even Abraham, by the time we get to the 12th chapter, and prior to the 12th chapter in the 11th, verse 27, these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, Haran. Haran begot Lot. Haran died before the Lord, before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So this is where Abraham's stock or Abraham's pedigree comes from. It's from Ur of the Chaldees, this region in Nimrod's kingdom. In the 12th chapter, that's from where Abram is called. He's called from that very area. One of the things that we have to also take into account is that Babylon did not only have one specific heyday, Babylon had two. Babylon was huge in the areas around 1600, 1500 BC. So Babylon didn't only spring up into prominence after the fall of the Assyrian Empire. Babylon prior, about 1,000 years prior, had sprung up into preeminence in that area during the reign or during the time of Nimrod. During these times, again, we've talked about this, in about 1500 BC, there was a king in Babylon, Ur-Nammu, and he basically established or discovered the system that we recognize today as banking. Now, grab your first sheet here. All right, we'll go a little out of order. The banking system, Babylon's banking system. It says, with Alexander's conquest of Assyria and Babylonia, he caused a scattering of highly trained Sogdians. You remember the Sogdians? The Sogdians were those that were living between the Black and Caspian Sea. Most Sogdians came from a stock from Judah, mingled with Egyptian, mingled with Phoenician. These were very highly trained, high-quality people that were taken and transplanted by the Babylonians. They eventually became known as Sogdians.
With Alexander's conquest of Assyria, Babylonia, he caused a scattering of highly trained Sogdians into Europe and into the northwest. Discoveries at Babylon at Ur attest to the source of this great movement. Now, I'll probably make copies of it, but you can read about it in the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's got a great section on the archaeology discovered during the time of Ur-Nammu. B, from the discoveries we can see that the Israelites were destined to carry a system that would change the course of civilization. The reason we said Israelites was because what happened when they were scattered? They were scattered to the north, they were scattered to the east, and as they were placed in their respective locations, they began to multiply. As that northern portion of Israel began to beat on the Assyrians from the inside and weaken, Babylon moves, takes over Assyria, finishes the transplantation of the southern part of the kingdom of Judah, along with the Egyptians, transplants them to the north and to the east, and these people are all living in these separate pockets, and these are areas we've already covered, during the time that they begin to scatter, specifically after the fall of Babylon and the rising of that Grecian Empire under Alexandria, the Macedonian. Y'all remember when Daniel was praying and the angel comes and he says, man, I was up there in heaven, I was fighting the enemy up there. He's the one that kept me from your prayer. And he says, behold, the prince of Grecia cometh. Remember that? He was telling Daniel in advance that even though they're in Babylon, the Medo-Persians are coming, but also the prince of Grecia. When the prince of Grecia, Alexander, came, and he began to persecute these people, he began to chase them to no avail. They crossed up over the Caucasus and literally spread out into Europe. These were very highly trained, very intelligent people that began to understand this system of Babylon from way back. So that's why I called them Israelites, and I even underlined it. 2152 BC, in the third dynasty of Ur, under the reign of Ur-Nammu, was begun a construction of a great ziggurat temple to reach the clouds. Many people would say that that was the Tower of Babel. In the confines of the temple were discovered secure coffers for the storage and safekeeping of precious metals under guard of the priests of the temple. Now, we've talked about this before. In Babylon, the safest place to keep your money was in the temple because you had temple priests and you had temple guards. Nobody let anybody mess with God's stuff. So what would happen is if you had gold, if you were out there plowing your field and you found vast amounts of gold or silver out there, what you would do is you'd put them on a cart and take it to the priest. The priest would give you receipts out of clay. You'd walk home, you'd have this clay receipt that you've deposited, 25,000 pieces of silver. You'd leave it there in the temple. These coffers were not only for the purpose of storing precious metal, but for loaning it out to the citizens at a rate of 20% its value. The priests in Babylon figured out that as long as you maintained a certain percentage in reserve, you can lend up to 10 times the amount of precious metal you had in there out to the people. Now, why they didn't figure out that you can manipulate the interest rate by even half a point and keep this system going, I don't know. But they figured out that you can lend it out at a rate of 20% annually and make a lot of money. So your first bankers or your first financiers were who? They were priests. I mean, when you look at the Catholic Church, when somebody needed money to buy a vineyard, where would they go? Who had all the money? Oh, the priests. Now again, we're going to get to it, but during the time of the European Crusades and during the time of the Crusades into the Holy Land, the looting and spoiling that took place by the hands of those who referred to themselves as Teutonic Knights as well as those Templar Knights, these people began to finance with all of the things and all of the money that they basically took and looted from the Holy Land. These coffers weren't only for the purpose of storing precious metal, but for loaning it out to the citizens at a rate of 20% its value per year. Clay tablets were given as receipts to those who wished to store their valuables. So also were clay tablet receipts required to borrow gold, silver, or other valuables. So they used clay with that cuneiform writing on it. What Ur-Nammu discovered was that he could loan out 10 times the amount of precious metal once in the coffers before the influx of precious metals regularly coming into the coffers from depositors would fail to maintain the level of precious metals originally measured. So he figured out that you can lend out 10 times the amount that you take in deposit. And as long as it keeps coming in, you'll never fail. Bottom line is you bring 1,000 pieces in. As long as you keep 200, you can loan out the 800 at 20% interest. You understand that? And you can keep doing this up to 10 times the amount that you're holding in deposit. So this is pure money. This is why I say the more you understand banking, the less you'll want to deal with them. I mean, some people say, what do we do about this? Well, short of dropping bombs, I don't know. Because it'll get you mad once you understand this. In brief, the temple priests discovered that they can loan out 10 times what they had and still remain solvent. For some unknown reason, it never occurred to them to reduce the arbitrary fixed rate on interest by 1/10 of the prevailing rate. That's the way we do it now. This became the basis of our modern banking system and what is known today as the capitalistic system. Capital comes from the Latin word caput, that is head, represents the head concerned. It is the product of former labor and possesses an earning power through use. Whatever the capital is invested, the owner of the capital is the head or the director. After paying tax expenses of production, all profits are property of the head investor or capitalist. This is what they figured out back here in Babylon. Viewed correctly, this is the genesis of a financial system launched on a debit structure, a system that always rewards those who loan over those who borrow. The extension of credit 10 times of what metallically is existent merely emphasizes the fact that capital gains enormously upon a small investment. Needless to say, when capitalism is inaugurated in those ancient days, the resident people became a society of debtors who lost concern with the protection of the city. As soon as they started owing money, they didn't care about nothing else because they basically were under other burdens, right? When you owe in money, nothing else matters. People became puppets, or number D. The more capital is loaned, the greater the indebtedness of the masses. As a consequence, attacking powers met with faint-hearted resistance on the part of the populace. People became puppets in the power of the kings and their satraps or their middlemen. The Middle East became the center of this newly inaugurated system. There were times, however, when newly formed groups capable of building up military strength without taint of royal order gained mastery over certain cities and escaped with untold wealth. Such was the sacking of Nineveh by the Sagilas, who then escaped over the Caucasus Mountains into Scythia. Now this becomes a problem because when people are under indebtedness and a new king comes and takes over, he also takes over as the lord of your debt. They're not erased. So it became profitable to literally take cities because you would take the city and not only would you take all the wealth that's in it, but you would also take all the debt that's in it and the people continue to pay you for their debt. So it became profitable to have people in debt. How many of you understand what takes place when your mortgage starts getting sold from one company to another? What are they doing? They're selling your debt. There's money in debt. Where did it come from? Babylon. 1,500 years after Anamu, Nebuchadnezzar came to power in 602 BC. Now again, we have a vast gulf of time between this, almost 1,000 years that passes. Babylon comes once again into its heyday. In between time, what happens? What happened at about 1,500, 1,400 BC? It's when the Egyptians were in power. All right? Story of Moses. Nebuchadnezzar came to power 602 BC, was known as one of the most spectacular rulers, son of Nabopolassar. The empire of Babylon stretched from Persia to the east, including Egypt. By 571 BC, Tyre fell and Babylon totally dominated the Near East. In a few years, the economic control was likewise effected. Nebuchadnezzar caused to be erected a great column in 569 BC on the plains of Dura near Babylon. The column was 100 feet high by 6 feet wide. On top of it was a winged disc of gold. This was the installation of the gold standard for the world. See, it's not just a matter of erecting some image where everybody said, bow down and worship it. There was something more to it. There was an establishment of a gold standard for the kingdom. It's like what gets fixed every day in London, then comes to New York. The gold standard became the mammon of the Babylonian economy. This marks the beginning of the Bible's Babylon the Great. Now, right there next to B, if you want to, you can write in the word mammon, or you can write in the word teat, or the colloquialism tit. So great became the power of mammon through the manipulation of money and interest that the prophet Daniel's vision clearly shows only God putting an end to the whole system. It isn't until Jesus comes that it strikes the image on the foot that what happens? The whole image, including Babylon, the head of gold, collapses. Remember that? Second Esdras' vision of the nondescript beast of Daniel demonstrates the voice coming from the body rather than the heads of the feathered wings representing the rulers of nations. It symbolizes a behind-the-scenes voice that controls even the rulers and the leaders of our world's nations. This talking body symbolizes the mammon system of Babylon the Great. On the Isle of Patmos, John's revelation, the angel cries, Babylon the Great is fallen. causing the world to mourn greatly. Similarly, the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's vision by Daniel states that the stone kingdom, cut without hands, representing the coming government of Christ, will strike the image at the feet and destroy all remnants of Babylon that had carried through history, existing even to now. Babylon marked the inception of the capitalistic system which has dominated the world through modern banking systems. Babylon thus comes to symbolize not the human system of gaining wealth and distributing abundance and goods to the world whose viewpoint is purely material. The world is not only inspired but has joined with and shares the fruits of this purely human accomplishment. And we don't need to read the rest of this. There's probably a couple other pages, but let's go ahead and read that first page, though. The use of wealth to produce more wealth isn't evil in a well-ordered society. It only becomes evil when interest rates are such that equal usury. Capitalism serves as the use to raise living standards and as the hope to inspire the highest fervor in all those who share in its earnings. The high interest rate in ancient Babylon arose through the financial wizardry prompted alone by their priests, the bankers. Since the world is not static but dynamic, it is necessary to adjust rates of interest to the changing dynamic of human endeavor. Thus, the rate of interest on wealth must fluctuate even as wealth does. Even our country fluctuates interest rates based on a number which include unemployment. As unemployment rises, the rates of interest are reduced. The early days of capitalism, and to some extent today, there has been a rapid rise in slavery. About the same time as the introduction of coinage in Greece, 7th century BC, also marked the appearance of industrial slavery. There was a shortage of skilled workmen. Slaves were imported from elsewhere. Farmers borrowed seed and help for harvest. Farmers soon encumbered their lands and houses during these depressed times. Failure to pay reduced men, once landowners, to slaves. In Attica, this is in Greece, at the end of the century, these were roughly 60,000 slaves and a population of 200,000 free men. So this is slightly over a fourth. In Sparta at the same time, slaves called helots outnumbered the population 12-1. In Athens, the beginning of 6th century BC, Solon at Athens helped contributed a better state of the downtrodden. This is a philanthropist, the form of philanthropy. Despite much land and the lives of the Athenians being forfeited to bankers, Solon lobbied and abolished the custom of pledging life for loans and security. So some bleeding heart decided to legislate you can't take people's souls for collateral. The overlords have always been short on mercy. People were always repressed by debt. Human nature to become arrogant, oppressive when power or authority is vested in someone. As in matters of religion, the restriction of debt burdened the common man. Likewise, in religion, a mass of restrictions arose shortly after the feudal system. Commerce at the time came under a planned economy called mercantilism, which is a national government taking control of trade and labor, even to the extent of prescribing unbearable conditions. Against such policies of mercantilism, the early Americans grew more and more weary of England and English financiers. The revolution followed shortly, freed the states from the English ties to form now a nation based on what is now good for America rather than good for the debtors or good for the lenders. The French and Russian revolutions were brought about by the same massive accumulation of money, property by the few. In France, new constitution was drawn up, every vestige of special privilege abolished. 1917 with the breadline rights, the Bolsheviks, and we got a lot more to say about that, deposed the government. At the head of the council was the director Lenin. In attempts to establish a socialistic state, they fell into communism, headed by Marshal Stalin. We'll finish this up another time, but I hope, if anything, you get a picture of what's taking place. Babylon's banking system is something that literally reaches far into the future and establishes even what we know today as our financial system or our financial world. It's not just talking about a city in the Middle East. It's actually talking about a system. Go back to your sheet here. We're still in Revelation, 17th chapter. Now, I went through this real fast. I want you to go home and you can read it and you can write all in the margins of it. Just abuse this thing. That's what it's for. And after you've written all over it and gotten all your notes in there and done your research, then you stick it in your plastic sheet so that you can teach other people. Book of Revelation, the 17th chapter. Now that we know a little bit more about Babylon, wasn't just the Babylon of the book of Daniel, wasn't just the Babylon of 2 Chronicles. This is the Babylon that reaches through time. Again, the whole notion of this is Daniel's interpretation of the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. The head of gold, arms of silver, belly of brass, legs and thighs of iron, iron mixed with clay, 10 toes or 10 horns, and then to come last, the stone kingdom. It isn't until the stone kingdom strikes this image at the feet that it collapses into chaff that's blown by the wind. This system and all that's carried through still exists today till that stone kingdom strikes that toe. All right, chapter 17 again. Verse 4. I'm sorry, verse number 3. Verse number 2. So this whore sits on the many waters, with whom the kings of the earth had committed fornication. The inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So I did what we did when we were going through the book of Revelation. I basically laid out these verses and separated them into areas of criteria. The reason we do that is because if we want to narrowly define Babylon, or this great whore, simply as the false church, and this is what the devil likes. Have you ever heard the term hide in plain sight? It means you want to hide something from them, put it on their dresser. All right? Put it right under their nose. See, the devil isn't stupid. What the devil can't hide from you, he'll put right under your nose. Do you still wonder as to why people don't believe in the Holy Ghost when it's right under their noses? Huh? Have you ever told somebody about tithing and they literally are in turmoil about it and it's right under their nose? Jesus was telling the people he was preaching to, don't say the kingdom is over here, or don't say the kingdom over there. The kingdom of God is in the midst of you. It's right under your nose. We read from commentaries that this great harlot is the false church. And we know that Babylon is representative of false religion or the great counterfeit. But what we do in our limited ideas is we always are trying to point out the church or the religion through which this false church or this harlot operates. And we've always blamed it on the Catholics, because at one time the Pope used to wear this funky hat that actually said mystery across it. So somebody showed him the verse. Where's that hat that looks like a fish with an open mouth? Same one the priests of the god Dagon, the fish god, used to wear. Catholics in their celibate lives, monastic living, nuns, all of the liturgy that's involved in Catholicism that really has nothing to do with Christ. Everybody says that's got to be the false church. But even if you read the first criteria, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. Now, it's true, there are kings that are in bed with the Catholic Church. There's no doubt about that. But all of them? Huh? It says the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now again, the word fornication, and again, I think just the way preachers say that too. It's not just fornication, it's fornication. I guess it's like saying mother and mother, right? There's a way to say it, right? That's right. You can say your mama, or you can say your mama, right? I mean, a little different. So, fornication, you can read that and just say fornication and it's benign. But when you say fornication and make it wicked and evil and make it something to beat people over the head with, it changes the meaning of it. Now, we talked about this when we actually covered this aspect of Revelation. Fornication is a word that literally makes reference to pornos. Literally a word from where you get pornography. It means you're a sellout, that you would trade or sell out the sacred for that which is short-term and pleasurable to the flesh. And it doesn't have to be sex, it could be food. In Hebrews 11, or actually chapter 12, where that term is utilized, that's the context. Don't be like that fornicator Esau, who for a morsel of bread sold his birthright. Why was he called a fornicator? Huh? Because he sold out. He took that which was sacred and traded it for food. He comes to his brother and says, I'm going to die, I'm starving, and for a bowl of soup, he trades the birthright. What's he called? A fornicator. So, in this context, what is the fornication that God is opposed to? Sell it out. So, you are a fornicator if you take any... Now listen, again, I say this because I've even had a preacher say, now, you can't mitigate sexual sin. Look, I'm not trying to mitigate anything. I'm just telling you what the Word says. You know, sexual sin. But the context of what the Apostle Paul is speaking of, the context of fornication in many of the Scriptures has more reference toward selling out that which is divinely given to you for something that's pleasurable to you. That's what fornication is. So, when it literally speaks of this harlot fornicating with everybody, what's it really saying? That her enticement to you, or her enticement to us, is literally to make us sell out the sacred, sell out what is God's, to sell out what God has for us, for something that temporarily is going to bring us some satisfaction or pleasure in the flesh. And I'm not just talking about sex. In Esau's case, it was food. Just a temporary fix, temporary pleasure. It might be to some folk money. To other folk, it might be a house. To other people, it might be a car. To other people, it might be a sporting game, a football game. You're going to sell out the divine. We're going to meet in church tonight. We're going to share with the Word of God. If God has placed you in here, literally under the sound of my voice, to learn the Word of God, then that is something that God has given you. I'm a gift minister. I'm that which is referred to in Ephesians 4 as a domata. God gave me to you. I get to read this, I get to study it, and then I get to give it to you. Huh? You don't have to plow, you don't have to till, you don't have to sow. You just have to show up, and I give it to you. Now, the Bible says, wherefore he said, when he ascended on high, led captivity captive, he gave gifts unto men. He gave me to you. So every Tuesday, every Sunday when I stand up here, every Thursday when Dan, Zan, and Eddie stand up here, I mean, I'll tell you what, every time at that shelter that Charles and Eddie show up, and Rick, that is a gift of God to those people who are called to sit in here. Whatever it is that we sell out for and not come, that's fornication. Now again, I'm not smart. It says the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk, literally meaning intoxicated, not in their right mind. The inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk or intoxicated with the wine of her fornication. She's going to make you happy. She's going to ease your pains. You're going to feel all better. I was watching some dude on TV saying, women get fat because they get depressed, and it just feels good to eat. That's what they were saying. They can be in control of food, so they'll eat food because it makes them feel good. We're going to have altar call for depression tonight. No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing. It says that the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So she literally doles out. And as we're going to read on further, she doles out because she possesses all the luxuries, all the things that we lust or that we desire after. She rides a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Again, this is going to be interpreted by itself, but it literally means that she is riding on these 7 kingdoms: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the 10-toed kingdom, the iron and clay mingled kingdom. 7 beasts, or 7-headed beasts with 10 horns. Number D, the woman is described as wearing purple. Who wears purple? Kings. Hey, wait a minute. How could a woman wear the purple of a king if she's a woman? Time out. They put the purple on Jesus because he's the king. There was purple that was actually introduced into the curtain of the holy place because it represented the kingship of God. She wears purple. She thinks she's the king. She wears red, the scarlet, typifying the sacrifice, the blood. She's decked with gold and precious stones. Doesn't that sound like the priesthood? She likes the white linen and the pearls. She holds a gold cup filled with her abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now again, what is her fornication? This isn't talking about sex. This is talking about what she has to offer. When Jacob was sitting there making porridge, he had something to offer Esau. I've often told you, I don't care how much money you have, if you're in the desert and you need water, you'll give me all of it. Huh? Money doesn't have value until you need something. You know, some people want to expand their property, and they don't care what the guy next door wants to sell it for. He might sell it for double, and you give it to him because you want it that bad. Money doesn't have any value till you see something that's worth trading. Well, what's she holding in her cup? The filthiness of her fornication, that which you want badly. On her forehead is written mystery. Now we'll stop there. On her forehead it says mystery. Now, this isn't Scooby-Doo. On her forehead it says mystery. Now, Paul speaks of it. He says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. He says, this is the mystery, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Mystery, what does it mean? It means that there is something that is hidden, something that you don't know, right? But in God, it's always something hidden that is to be revealed. So on her forehead it says mystery. Isn't it something that for all these years, and I'm telling you, you ought to go pick up half the commentaries I pick up and read about this great whore, this harlot, and you ought to read all the stuff it has in there. I mean, everybody's the whore. I mean, if it ain't the Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, it's the New Age cults. You know, it's the Islamics. It's the Catholics. You know, the Baptists think it's the Pentecostals. On her forehead it's written mystery. That alone should tell you that God is trying to reveal something, but yet the devil is trying to hide something. Mystery. Babylon the Great. On her forehead. It's like, I did this. I walked up to somebody that had a name tag, and I called him by that name. He says, oh, that's not my name. But if somebody got their name on their shirt, man, what do you think? Huh? That's their name. She's got a name across her head, and it says, Mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. It's a lot of embroidery, huh? That's on her forehead. She must have a big head. Probably why she wears all that purple, red, and gold and precious stones. Keep your
eyes off her head. It's written on her head, Babylon the Great. Is there any mystery as to who this woman is? Who's this woman? Babylon. When in verse 19 of chapter 16, God says, I remembered Babylon. It's not just a city. It's not just a geographic place. It's literally a system. So on her head it says, mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, the abominations and abominations of the earth. F. The woman, Babylon, she's drunk or intoxicated with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So, literally, this woman has deceived the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Now, chapter 17 splits here and starts speaking about the beast. The beast was, is, not, comes out of the pit and goes into perdition. A. He was, is not, yet is. She sits on the seven-headed beast. The heads are the mountains or the nations of great peoples. There's 7 kingdoms. 5 is fallen, 1 is. And again, if you read chapter 17, this is what it says. I've just made it easy for you. I listed the kingdoms. First one, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, then the 10-horn or the 10-toed kingdoms, then Antichrist kingdom that comes from that 10-toed kingdom, then the stone kingdom from Jesus. All together it makes 9. John writes in the time of the Roman Empire. So if you write down right there next to the Roman Empire, write John. The Bible says that 5 empires had already fallen. So what 5 is he referring to? Right. So is John accurate in his writings? Yeah. 5 empires have already historically fallen while Rome is. Reference here is to the power behind the empires, namely the demonic powers that controlled the nations and persecuted and conquered with pleasure the people of God. The other kingdoms remain in the future because they have not yet come. We don't have the 10-toed kingdom yet. I know the preachers are going gaga over that European Union. E. The beast is the 8th, which comes out of the 7th kingdom. This is one of the toes or horns that is destined for perdition. And again, this is all just my outline on chapter 17. It's almost word for word here. They will oppose the Lamb Jesus, but they'll be defeated. F says, 10 horns or 10 kings yet to come. They'll have a short reign because he says they'll reign for an hour. They'll have a short reign with the beast which comes from among them. They will give him his power and authority. They will oppose the Lamb Jesus, but they'll be defeated. The waters represent the multitudes of peoples of every nation, every tongue. The 10 kings will hate the whore Babylon the Great and make her desolate, naked. They shall eat her flesh, burn her with fire. The 10 kings are under the control of God and carry out his will. Now, as we read Revelation chapter 17, and we begin to see the way that God is actually moving in these last days, one of the things that I enjoyed looking at was that 17th verse of chapter 17, or chapter 16. And the 10 horns that you saw upon the beast, they shall hate the whore. Now stop there. Why will kings suddenly hate the whore? Every king prior to these guys is fornicating with her. Every king up to this point is fornicating with her. Why suddenly do these kings hate her? Aside from the fact that God put it in their heart to hate him. Do you know why? It's because these kings understood that they weren't the kings. It's like George W. Do you think he doesn't know he's not the boss? Huh? You think Tony Blair recognizes that he ain't the boss? Huh? Because Tony Blair can say, send the troops, and the banks can say, we ain't got no money. Huh? The rulers of the world, do they recognize that they do not run the show? Huh? Oh, Putin out in Russia. I mean, that IMF's got him kissing everybody's butt. Behave, treat people good, or you ain't going to get no IMF money. Is Putin really the boss? How about them Chinese? Huh? They ought to get their IMF money too. You think those people realize who's the boss? Now tell me the truth. Anybody who bows or bends over for money, and even though they say, well, I know what I'm doing, I'm just doing it for the money, are they really the boss? Now, if you come in and say, I ain't playing hardball, I don't like the idea of somebody else being the boss from behind the scenes, I hate her, that's what happens. They hate her. These 10 kings rise up and say, we have nothing to do with her. We hate her. Now, let's keep reading. The 10 kings, they will hate the whore Babylon, the great, make her desolate, naked. They shall eat her flesh and burn it with fire. 10 kings are under the control of God to carry out his will. In verse 18, she rules over the kings of the earth. Now, if we're to take this criteria here, and you overlay this or juxtapose this over any religious system in the world, can you identify any of them as Babylon the Great? The great whore? Can you? So why do you have every church in the world out there trying to find the religion that the Antichrist is going to come from? Huh? Now I'll tell you what, we know where he's coming from. He's coming out of that Seleucid portion of the kingdom in Iran, Iraq. That's where he's coming from. He's coming from right here. This area of Iran, Iraq. That's where the Antichrist comes from. Revelation 18:2, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. God's judgment on the whore Babylon. This is finally God getting her. The system becomes possessed also. Look at chapter 18. Verse number 2. Well, let's get the context. Verse 1. After these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Now listen, these 10 kings that hate her, they begin to do everything to dismantle her. But they dismantle her only to the extent that the Antichrist and the false prophet come in and say, now we're going to run the financial system. You cannot buy or sell apart from the mark. So who ends up taking over this financial system? Now, again, we all realize that we can't live without finances. The church itself in tithes and offerings operates with finances. Everything's financial. We recognize that. But do we ever come to the realization that this financial system in and of itself is evolving and moving toward this? Now see, this is another reason why the tithe is so important. If I give Dan Zan $1,000, that $1,000 literally is coming out of a system, this Babylonian, is coming out of a system that does nothing except end in a culmination of establishing the Antichrist, giving him full possession and control of the world. But when Dan Zan takes that $100 off the top and hurls it into eternity by paying tithe, and then takes that extra $15 and pays offering, sends another $5 to support a mission, what is he doing with that money? He literally removed it from the system and put it in a new system. A system that's unseen. See, the system that you can see is the one we all operate in. But the system that is unseen, the system that allows return on your investment givings into the kingdom, that system is unseen. Because it operates in the realm of faith. So if I give Dan Zan $1,000, when you get your paycheck, I don't care from where, you can be you can drive a bus that's bringing cocaine into the country. And I say that to take it to an extreme. And the guy gives you $10,000 for the bus ride, and you're thinking, thank you, Jesus. Right? Now, we all agree that was dirty money, right? But you take that $1,000 tithe and put it into the kingdom of God, what have you just done? You just cleaned it. You've just taken that income, and as a saint, you have placed it into another financial system. You have just entered into another area of financial operation that is unseen. Now, some people get mad and say, oh, you mean I can deal drugs? And I'm not saying that. Listen, let's not be stupid. But I think you understand what I'm saying. Listen, man, if I find a case of tequila, and I say, holy smokes, this is the good stuff. I don't drink tequila. Last time I drank tequila, I woke up in a park wet from like wet from the face up from the morning dew, and I just cannot stand even the smell of it anymore. So if I found a case of tequila and sold it, somebody says, "Oh, you sold the devil's juice." I pay my tithe on it, and I have just, and I say this, I want you to understand, I want to take it to even the lowest common denominator and tell you that what I'm doing is I'm entering into another realm of financial systems, or of a financial system that most people don't understand. The system itself becomes possessed. Verse 2. Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils. Now let me ask you a question, man. Is the Catholic Church going to get possessed by devils? Is the Mormon Church going to get possessed by devils? Huh? Is the Islamic Church going to be possessed by devils? The system becomes possessed. And every foul spirit encaged to every unclean and hateful bird. See, all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, is why God hates her. Kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. The earth's merchants have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies or luxuries. Now again, the earth's merchants, that means everybody who buys and sells. They've gotten rich from Babylon or from this system. Now, how many merchants get rich off the Catholics? How many merchants get rich off Islam? How many merchants get rich off the Mormons? Huh? Really, can you lay this on any religion and say, oh, that Babylon, it's the false church built on the false religion? Is this talking about some desert city out between the Euphrates and the Tigris River? That's where it came from. Now, let me ask you a question, because I've read a lot of these prophecy books that say, United States is Babylon. Yeah, that's right. You give them the finger. These people are stupid. Now, if anything, the United States is wrapped up big time in the system of Babylon. But the U.S. is not Babylon. Everybody always says, yeah, the U.S. is going to burn. And even on September 11th, there was preachers that were preaching Revelation chapter 18. Babylon is burning. They were, I'm telling you. People came and told me, oh yeah, my pastor was preaching on Babylon is burning. It's like, what? God's angels are calling God's people to come out of her system. So even at this stage of the book of Revelation, God's angels are telling people, come out of her, come out of her. And at this segment of the Bible, the people coming out of her are that group of people that are restored Israel. G, her sins have reached the heavens. That's what Revelation 18 says. Her sins have reached the heavens. The things that she's done have reached the heavens. She glories in herself, a queen, not a widow, no sorrow. The system will be overthrown in a day, basically to demonstrate that God did it. In fact, God narrows down the microscope later and says in an hour. Everyone will cry for her. Kings and merchants alike will bemoan her destruction. All merchandise is hers. Let's read verses 11 through 14. Let's find out what Babylon has. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, for no man buys their merchandise anymore. Now, stop there. When God finally destroys Babylon, no man buys her merchandise anymore. So why is everybody crying? Well, let's find out what her merchandise is. Verse 12, the merchandise of gold. Now, stop there. What happens when there's no more gold? Now, did you all hear about all the gold that was stored in the vaults of the World Trade Center? Did y'all hear about that? It got smashed so bad that it's floating around with the dust. When you drop 105 stories of concrete and steel, even on a vault, man, that stuff is floating around. That's gold. That stuff's floating around in the air. You think you're going to go out there and find a gold bar? Or like putting a penny on the train track, you're just going to find a flattened out piece of gold? Yeah, you need a vacuum cleaner. Did y'all hear about that? They had gold bars all destined for Europe and China and Japan. They had them all in vaults, and They said, well, we're afraid of people looting. They got out there, found out, man, you can't even find it anymore. It's like those dogs they brought trained to sniff out people. You know, did you hear about the dogs? They're all in therapy now. Did you all hear about that? The dogs all had to go to therapy because they took the dogs out there and they couldn't find nobody. That's why they say there's about 5,000 missing, but they've only recovered 240 bodies. Everything else is pieces. So they take the dogs out there and say, they're trained to sniff bodies, and they take the dogs and there's just the smell of people everywhere. So then the dog, because he don't find nobody, the dog trips, has a mental breakdown, goes home and curls up next, and the dog got to go to therapy because the dogs basically work on a find and get rewarded system. They go out there, smell flesh, can't find a body. They didn't get no reward, so they went home and lost their minds. And there's actually money. There's people that are donating money to try to get these dogs therapy. They're so messed up. Now, me personally, you get a new dog and send those to the Vietnamese or something. Ain't nothing worse than a dog that's depressed. They get fat. All right, let's go on. All right. Everyone will cry for her. Let's see what she has. Verse 12. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones. So all these diamonds and all of these jewels. The pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, fine wood, all manner of vessels of ivory, all manners of vessels of most precious wood. I don't know if anybody told the Lord that ivory is banned. Now, y'all believe ivory's really banned? You just can't get it, huh? We ain't got enough money to get it, but ivory's still out there. All manner of ivory, all manner of vessels of precious wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, beasts. So much for the bread, huh? Sheep, horses, chariots, slaves, souls of men. And the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee, and all these things that were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. And the merchants, or the people who sold these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. And alas, alas, the great city that was clothed in fine linen, purple, scarlet, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, in 1 hour so great riches has come to nothing. And every shipmaster, literally the captain of every ship, and all the company in the ships, sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stand afar off and cry when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like this great city? Now again, if Babylon is a false religion, if Babylon is representing a church of some type where this whore is the head pastor, or the popus, or whatever, when did this organization, or when did this type of structured religion, when did it own everything that man ever wanted? Never did. I mean, I'm telling you, if today, Bin Laden nuked the Vatican, I bet you every Japanese fella bringing over Nissans and Toyotas on the, Atlantic and the Pacific, they ain't going to shed a tear, are they? How many Toyotas do you think the Vatican buys? They drive them junky little European cars, huh? You think the Japanese ship captains are going to be crying? Huh? You think the Japanese that resell us our steel are going to be crying? You think them Taiwanese or them Chinese sending over that knockoff clothes are going to be crying? Huh? You think all the merchants are going to be crying if you blew up the Vatican? If the U.S. nukes Afghanistan and then Iran, Iraq, and gets rid of all of those crazy Muslims, talking about the Shiites? Let's just say they overgeneralize and blow them all up. You think everybody in the ship's going to be crying? You think every store vendor's going to be crying? Huh? So it isn't Islam? And if we went to Salt Lake City and blew up the Mormon temple, all the ships wouldn't be crying either? So what is the criteria to Babylon? People cry. She owns everything. She has access to everything. So J, all merchandise is hers. There will be wailing and great mourning for the whore who is clad in purple, scarlet, gold, precious stones, and pearls.
Her riches come to nothing in a day, in fact, in an hour. Shipmaster sailors and their crews will cry, weeping and wailing. M. God's vengeance, the city desolate, power broken, no more joy in Babylon anymore. N. All nations were deceived by her sorceries, almost as if it were witchcraft. Magic. Watch me make money out of nothing. And we'll talk about that. How the Federal Reserve actually prints money with nothing to back it. Congress says, we need $15 billion to help the airlines. And the Federal Reserve says, aye, sir, sign here. And what do? Get the printing presses going. Here's $15 billion. Somebody says, well, where are they going to get it? From us. It's like, did you hear those postal employees, those idiots, who said, well, you know, all this anthrax stuff is really messing up the post office, and it's going to cost us millions and millions and millions of dollars to put in machinery to irradiate and clean the mail from anything that's poisonous. And we don't think the people who buy stamps ought to bear the burden. So everybody says, yeah, yeah. Well, who do they want to bear the burden? The government. Well, who do you think pays the government? So the people who buy the stamps still bear the burden, right? The hell's wrong with people? What, are they stupid? The head of the post office, the postmaster, stands up and says, I don't want to put the burden on the people who buy the stamps. And everybody's, yeah, yeah. So they're going to put the burden on the government to bail them out, but who's going to pay them? The people who buy the stamps. So the nations are deceived by her sorceries. Their trickeration, as Don King would say. It's trickeration. Oh, the blood of the saints, the prophets, and all slain were found in her. Now, how have you ever heard the saying that all wars are religious in nature? You ever heard that? All wars have some religious connotation behind them. Would it surprise you to know that all wars had money behind them? Every one of them. Every single one of them. Everybody says, yeah, Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated. So started the big one. Why'd they assassinate him? Because Germany was knocking Great Britain off their roost. Great Britain had to find a way to kick the daylights out of Germany. Read the Treaty of Versailles, you're going to find out that even between World War I and World War II, that treaty was to curb the financial power of Germany, which they weren't going to stand for. Blood of the saints, the prophets, and all slain were found in her. You're going to find out that this woman is responsible for more death and mayhem than anything else in history. And let me stop there real quick just to say this. As we go on and we begin to define Babylon and the system and begin to identify it working through history, we have to get out of our heads the notion that many people mistakenly use or many mistakenly follow these notions that this is run by Jews. No. There are Jewish participants. But listen, what do you think of a Jew that let 6 million Jews get killed? Huh? They ain't Jewish. They're sellouts, right? They ain't Jews. Revelation 19, verse 2. Jesus avenges the blood of his servants at her hand. His return now is aimed at the enemy who's moved into the valley of Megiddo against restored Israel. So Babylon, biblically, this is going to be the criteria. This is actually all biblical right here. I literally just took this right out of the verses and put it into an outline that we're going to use for this whole study, because everything that we teach from this point on is going to be based on Babylon according to this criteria. Anything outside this criteria, somebody's making it up. All right? So, I'm done for tonight.